Hello, Meoni here, and welcome to a short guide for Alphascape 4 Savage. This is an unsynced guide for level 80, and ultimately, it's a bit rough around the edges. This is not pro play. This is just to prove that you can do it by cutting a lot of corners, and basically cheesing a lot of strats. A lot of people say this fight is uncheesable and is too difficult. Well, I disagree completely, since we farmed 8 mounts over the weekend. I've recorded 3 full runs in total to completion, because that's the last mounts we needed, and I have remembered to record the footage last night, and we're going to splice those together and show you what happens in different situations. By no means is this pro play, we are not professionals, and by no means am I going to read all of the exact mechanics and what you have to do for every single little thing. I think that's completely pointless, and we need to actually get to the point so that you know what to do if you're about 500 item level like us and you just want to blow through it and get some mounts and some fancy glamour. Without further ado, let's kill the boss. So here we are, we have a paladin, a gunbreaker setup. I'm the white mage, Rose is the scholar, we have a dragoon, a samurai, a machinist, and of course a black mage for that big DPS. So basically we start by pulling Omega M to the side of the room, the right side, because essentially where the eye is, it always is in the north at the start. It will basically do this thing called suppression, which is this big laser beam that will wreck the entirety of the length in front of the eye. You'll see that go off in just a second. You don't want to be in the middle of the room. That's a bad move. So Beyond Defense actually targets a random player and does large-scale damage, and then AoE around them that puts magic vulnerability on them. For that you want to spread, but the follow-up is called Pile Pitch, where basically the boss will just choose someone apart from that first initial target and try to kill them. If you have the magic vulnerability debuff, do not stack. Everyone else should be stacked together apart from those people. So as you can see, the tank here died because he had the magic vulnerability debuff, so he should have ran away. But, we didn't know that at the time, so we rezzed him up and continued like usual. Next, we're looking for him to turn into a female. When he does, essentially go behind her. You can use arm's length or, of course, shorecast to not have to move at all. You can stay DPSing, but every time it transitions into a female, be behind her, because she will do a knockback, and that's how you finish that. So finish her off until she gets to 0, and then she'll transition. Essentially, where the eye is facing, it could be multiple places because it moves around. You need to have one of the healers, because it's both healers that get targeted with a stack marker. Have one of the healers go to opposite the eye, and the other one to either C or A in this particular situation. So a 90-degree angle from you at one of the cardinals. Then, once the both of them spawn, find the female and stand behind it. Once again, this is a knockback. Always stand behind the female. At this point then, we're on the add phase proper. It'll get basically one of 2 buffs. One of them will basically say that it increases amounts of damage if they are closer together, so they need to be pulled apart, and the opposite. So you need to find out what those are, and the tanks need to pull them apart or put them together depending on that particular debuff on the target. We also split into 2 groups at this point, so we actually guarantee that 4 people have the male buff and 4 people have the female buff, and obviously you can't attack the other target because they become immune to you, so you need to set those groups up already. Once we go on to fundamental synergy, this is the bit that people always mess up on. Essentially what you need to do is, if you're an odd number, so an odd number, you go opposite of where the boss is that you're attacking. That's the best way of thinking about it. And if you're an even number, then you go to where the boss is, the boss's current side that you're attacking. That's how that works. And the lower numbers out of those are the closest to the eye, because they're the ones that are going to get hit first, and then those people need to move in once they get charged. And then obviously the higher numbers, the opposite side. So we're in between the colored markers here, 2 by 2, and then 2 on the other side and 2 there. You see that? So basically it's depending on odds away from the boss, evens next to the boss, and then the lower numbers out of those. If you've got like a 1, for example, or a 2, then you need to be next to where the eye is. There we go. Simple as that. Now it's just a simple case of surviving stuff and basically bringing those 2 bosses down to 0%. You'll see lots of mechanics. They can vary between a couple of patterns. Actually, you might get AoEs inwards, outwards, etc. A lot of people are going to die here. Just make sure that a couple of you know what you're doing and survive through it, because if you can survive through those attacks because they're at 0%, you've guaranteed yourself a transition. Now, the way this fight works, like many of the other endgame activities like Kefka, etc., is it basically creates a shortcut as soon as you get to this phase. So as soon as the boss is up, we're going to make sure that we get the shortcut by attacking the boss, and then we're going to jump off, and then we can basically reset the fight onto phase 2 with everyone alive. And that's quite important. If you manage to get to this point with everyone alive, then there's obviously, you know, you can just continue from where you left off. But such is the way of things, especially on this particular footage, you know, that just doesn't necessarily go to plan all the time. So at least you have a shortcut halfway through, ready for phase 2. So when they do transition, they'll transition into the big monster, and you just want to get a good hit on that before you jump off. And yeah, it's as simple as that. If you manage to get to that thing, I wouldn't jump off before it becomes attackable, just out of the fact that sometimes I've seen it bug out and actually reset the entire fight if you jump off too quick. So it's better just to wait a little bit extra and guarantee that you're actually on the second phase, because you don't want to go through that too many times, I can assure you. So phase 2, the first thing you'll see is actually targeted to the top 2 enmity list players, so make sure those are both your tanks. Basically, one of the tanks will be targeted with a blue circle on them, like a blue target, and it's called target analysis. What will happen is that player will need to spread away from everyone as they get hit with a small sort of amount of damage, but it will actually put a magic vulnerability debuff on them and anyone next to them, so that's why they need to spread. Followed up straight after that will be something called Savage Wave Cannon. This has to be shared between both tanks for that tank to survive, or the person needs to stand out there where they were currently spread to and use Super Bolide or Hallowed Ground or any of the other immunities that you have at your disposal as a tank. It's very important that that person spreads away. You do not want that magic vulnerability debuff to be on anyone else at this point. Okay, next mechanic is Patch. Let's slow this all the way down so I can explain this properly. Patch essentially puts 4 tethers on targets. 2 of the tethers will actually pop if they're too close together, and 2 will pop if they're too far apart. You need to strategically pop these so that you can actually do the least amount of damage to the party and heal up through it and actually survive an AoE that comes afterwards. Let's explain that first before we explain anything else on screen. So basically what happens is that we cheese this by stacking up behind the boss, so that basically the first 2 tethers will pop immediately as soon as they appear. This doesn't kill you and gives you plenty of time to heal up. The following 2 tethers though, after that, the ones that you have to separate to actually blow, you wait until the magic vulnerability debuff has faded, because it only lasts a few seconds, then pop that one. Then you wait a couple more seconds and then pop the second one. That way you don't get magic vulnerability debuffs that will kill you potentially when you pop the tethers. You do, however, need to pop all 4 tethers before Ion Efflux is cast, which is a large-scale AoE, and if you have magic vulnerability debuffs from those pop tethers on your player characters, it will basically be a wipe. It's not the sort of damage you can absorb at level 80 currently. So let's rewind a little bit again, because there's other things that happen. We've got the Offense Wave Cannon, I think it's called, where it can be either sides of the boss or front and back. Basically, the way you know there's a safe zone is if there is a sort of like blue light on either north and south or east and west, and you basically stand on that side to avoid that. The other mechanic you'll see here is Oversampled Wave Cannon. You might be still tethered at this point. Just carefully move the tethers away from that of the actual monitors that spawn. Only the 2 tanks should enter those monitored areas in melee range, and they need to be spread apart. You can't stack both tanks together here, as they'll both get hit for quite a bit of damage. You definitely do not want to have anyone else close to those monitors, so just edge away from them. That's how you deal with that mechanic. So next up, leading up to Hello World, this is a mechanic that everybody said that's uncheesable, Meoni. Well, essentially, you get all of your DPS to jump off. That's how we do it. All 4 of them jump off as soon as Hello World is cast, and then we have the tanks and healers stack in the middle of the room, get hit by the first attack, and then move to cardinal positions that we predetermine. So we've got A, B, C, and D there, for north, south, east, west, you know, obviously. And then we're just keeping people alive, the tank self-heals, and we res all the DPS. The DPS only accept the res after all of those AoEs have gone out and just before Ion Efflux is cast again. So you should have everyone up before the next Ion Efflux, and then they go ham. It's as simple as that. The next thing is Archive Peripheral. Essentially, this is where Omega teleports to the middle, and 3 arm units will spawn on the outside of the arena with rotational arrows and colours on them. They shoot a line AoE down the middle of the arena, which rotates in the direction their rotational arrow indicates. So orange units turn clockwise, and blue units will turn counterclockwise. It's very similar to some other mechanics you've seen before. You just need to find the safe zone. Meanwhile, during this, a tank will be targeted again with the marker. They'll get hit, and then there'll be the laser beam. Basically take this on your own or stack together to split the damage or whatever. Then you'll have the lasers again, the lights on the boss again, so you go north and south to stay in the safe zone. And then if you ever see these monitors appear, this is something else to bring up. Essentially, the tanks need to be closest to the monitors. Everyone else needs to be away from those monitors, and the tanks need to be like split apart next to the actual monitors, so they're not actually taking each other's damage, because it does a little AoE around them. But the tanks are the only ones that should be over there. It's essentially a tank buster that you can get hit by. The next thing that you will actually see then are basically these tethers that go on players. You need to create a star shape. So if you're at 4, you need to go over to 2, for example, opposite sides. And if you make a star and you stand between these things and don't get hit by multiple lines, you will survive. Then it's just a simple case. We should be around about 25% or a little bit lower than that. And we're preparing for the worst part of the fight. This is going to be a big DPS check for the rest of you if you can skip a lot of the other mechanics coming up. Our DPS is absolutely insane on a few of these runs, but it's because we've practiced this a lot. You're going to get another patch, essentially. So do it exactly the same as before. Stack it up. And, take the first hit. You'll see the light show appear on the boss, so you either go north or south or east and west, depending on where those lights are. Then you'll see the monitors again. Again, don't run too far away for it with those tethers. Don't pop those too early. The tanks should be on those. Then, work out who's popping the tether. Then you pop the second tether in between heals. You can't pop them all together. Your healer won't manage. And then essentially you nuke the boss as hard as you can. In this particular attempt, as you saw here, the boss died before we saw the next mechanic. In case you don't kill it before then, a good way of actually dealing with this is for you to wait a few, and you'll see where the boss will jump to because he will spin. When you see him sort of like position himself as if he's going to jump, for example, over this direction, you basically go to the opposite side. If you're anywhere near to where he jumps to, you will instantly die, even at level 80 with 500 item level. It doesn't pull any punches. So there's 2 things that can happen here. You can nuke the boss as hard as possible to kill it before Archival becomes a real problem, and you transition into another hello world, which you really do not want to see. Or you can actually nuke the arm, the opposite side of the boss, basically mark one and take it down, and it gives you a safe spot. You also have stack markers and separate markers. If you're a bit slower, separate those out, and then it's just a simple case of killing the boss. At this point, though, you shouldn't see any of this really, or any of what's past this, if your DPS is good enough. You can kill this before Archival, and that's ultimately what you're aiming for. But if you do see it, just know that you need to be the opposite side of where the boss looks like it's going to jump to, or you'll die, and then hope that you have enough DPS to kill it off. And it's as simple as that. We made it look simple. It took us a long time to figure this stuff out, but let me just assure you that it is actually quite simple to do. The cheese of Hello World is the thing that gives you the biggest advantage. Now, of course, you could do all of these mechanics appropriately, properly, and probably kill it a lot faster, perhaps, because your DPS would be alive, but you would have to deal with some very complex mechanics, which we're not going to go into today, because it's basically pages and pages of what to do. And we saw like 5 mechanics out of the 50 from that phase. So there we go. Hopefully that was helpful. If it isn't and you have any questions, feel free to post them in the comment section. I'll get back to as many people as possible. But that's pretty much the gist of it. It's very easy to farm once you have it down, and you'll have it in no time. Any questions, like I say, leave it below. Join our public Discord. You can ask on there as well. We don't bite, and I'll indeed see you all next time.